I'd won this club a title, worn the armband for 6 seasons, given them 11 years of my life. And I found out I'd been cut from the team from a forward text message, sent by a journalist, at 7:42 in the morning, while I was standing in my kitchen in my socks looking for a frying pan. Not a phone call. Not a meeting. Not even a courtesy email from someone wearing the club's badge. 11 years of my life, reduced to 4 words on a stranger's screen before anyone who actually owed me an explanation bothered to say a single thing to my face. By the end of this story, the man who did that to me will have lost his job, the club will have lost league points, and I will have walked into a new stadium to a standing ovation. But I want to take you back to the beginning, because the way it happened matters just as much as how it ended. I wore the captain's armband for 6 seasons. 11 years total at the club, if you count the academy years before that, back when I was a skinny 17-year-old who couldn't afford the train fare to training and rode 40 minutes on a bicycle with a duffel bag strapped to my back instead. I scored the goal that won Union East Athletic its first championship title in club history, the one they still show in the highlight reel before home matches, the one where I'm sliding on my knees in the rain with my arms out like I'm trying to hold up the whole stadium. That goal, that title, should have meant my name was part of this club's history forever. This is the story of what happens when a club decides loyalty is something you can spend without ever paying it back. And it's the story of what I decided to do once I understood exactly what they thought they could get away with. My name is Marguerite Okafor. I'm 31 years old. I've got a scar above my left eyebrow from a collision in a 2019 Cup semi-final that the local paper once called the cut that built a legend, and I still train at 6 in the morning at the Union East facility outside Manchester, in that grey half-light before the sun's properly up, because that's the only hour the pitch belongs to me and nobody else. I should tell you about Felix Betrayal first, because everything that follows runs through him one way or another. He'd been hired about 8 months before all this started, brought in from a rival academy system with a reputation for modernizing club culture. He talked in interviews about data-driven squad building, about brand alignment, about marketability metrics, phrases that sounded like they'd been workshopped in a meeting room with floor-to-ceiling windows and not one single football on display anywhere. I'd shaken his hand exactly twice in 8 months. Both times his grip was too firm, like he was trying to prove something to a room that wasn't actually watching. The first sign something was wrong came from my agent, Selina Marchetti. She's been with me since I was 23, steady and quiet in a way that used to drive me mad when I was younger and wanted someone who'd shout on my behalf. Now I understand that steady is exactly what you want when the ground starts moving under you. She called me on a Tuesday evening. I remember because I was driving home from training in my grey hatchback, the one with the cracked wing mirror I kept meaning to fix, and her voice had a flatness to it I'd learned to pay attention to over 8 years of working together. "They're stalling on the renewal," she said. "Bramall keeps rescheduling. 3 times now." I laughed it off. Genuinely laughed, out loud, alone in my car at a red light. Contracts move slowly. Lawyers move slowly. I'd been through 2 previous renewals and both had dragged on for months before anyone signed anything. I had no reason yet, none at all, to think this was anything other than the usual bureaucratic crawl. I told Selina not to worry. I told myself the same thing about 4 more times that week, like saying it enough would make it true. The text came on a Thursday morning. I want to walk you through exactly how it happened, because the smallness of it is part of what made it so brutal. It was from Daniel Osei. I'd known Daniel since my first full season with the first team, back when he was a junior reporter covering reserve matches nobody else wanted to cover, standing in the rain with a notepad while more senior journalists sat in the press box drinking coffee. He's the kind of reporter who still calls players before he prints anything about them, which in this business is rarer than you'd think. Over the years he became something close to a friend, the kind you don't see outside of football but trust completely inside it. His message was 4 words. Did they tell you? That's the text I told you about at the very start of this story. I hadn't eaten breakfast yet. I was standing in my kitchen in my socks, looking for the good frying pan, the heavy one with the handle that doesn't wobble, and I remember the exact feeling of my stomach dropping before I'd even opened the link he'd sent. I sat down at my kitchen table. I read the article 3 times, slowly, like reading it a 4th time might change what it said. Union East Athletic was finalizing terms with an 18-year-old winger named Talia Voss. A player I had mentored personally for 2 seasons. A player I had recommended, by name, in a meeting with the youth coaching staff, because I saw something in her that reminded me of myself at that age, the hunger, the way she'd stay after training to work on her weak foot until it was too dark to see the ball properly. The article quoted Betrayal calling her the long-term identity of this club going forward. There was no mention of me. Not as a footnote. Not as a passing reference to the captain she might be replacing. Not even as a question for the reporter to ask. It was as if 11 years had simply been edited out of the club's own story, like a paragraph deleted from a draft nobody bothered to proofread. I called Selena before I'd even put the kettle on. She hadn't been told either. Nobody from the club had reached out to her, not a call, not an email, nothing. And that's when I understood this wasn't an oversight. You don't accidentally forget to tell your captain's agent that the club is replacing her. That's a decision. Someone sat in a room and decided silence was easier than a conversation. I requested a meeting, and 3 days later, I got one. A glass-walled conference room on the 2nd floor of the training facility, the kind of room that always smells faintly of fresh carpet no matter how long it's been there, like they replace it every quarter just to keep the smell of new money in the air. Bramwell sat across from me with a tablet in his hands instead of a folder, scrolling through something before he even looked up to say hello. "We're moving in a different direction," he said, like he was reading it off a script someone had handed him on his way in. "It's not personal. It's about long-term value." I told him that he'd let an 18-year-old find out from a press release before I'd heard anything from anyone wearing the club's badge. I told him I'd captained this team through 2 relegation battles and a continental run that filled the stadium for the first time in a decade. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pause. He just kept talking about brand alignment and marketability metrics, the same rehearsed phrases, the kind of language that's clearly been used in some other room, on some other person, long before it ever got used on me. What he didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that I'd spent the 3 days leading up to that meeting quietly gathering something far more dangerous than a grievance. I had old emails. I had a voicemail from the previous sporting director, the one Bramwell had replaced, praising my leadership in writing, dated, time-stamped, sitting in my phone's storage like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. And I had something else. I had a name, and a memory, from 2 years earlier, that Bramwell had absolutely no idea I was still holding on to. 2 years before any of this, Union East Athletic had been investigated for irregular third-party ownership arrangements tied to 2 of its academy signings, the kind of arrangement that, if proven, triggers a transfer ban from the league's governing body, the kind of scandal that can gut a club's recruitment for years. The investigation had quietly closed without charges. Quietly is the important word there. It barely made headlines. Most supporters never even knew it happened. As captain, I'd been shown documents at the time, for transparency, as part of an internal club review. I was told, verbally, to keep them confidential. But I'd signed nothing, no NDA, no formal restriction, that actually prevented me from keeping copies, and somewhere in the back of my mind I'd always known that. I never used them. I never even thought about using them. For 2 years they just sat there, an old folder on an old laptop, the kind of thing you forget about until the exact moment you need to remember it. Bramwell's predecessor had handled that crisis carefully and protected the club from real damage. Bramwell, in his rush to rebrand the entire team around an 18-year-old and erase the woman who'd helped build the culture he was now trying to repackage, had absolutely no idea those documents still existed. He had no idea, either, that Daniel Osei, the same journalist who'd sent me forwards on a Thursday morning, had been quietly investigating that exact ownership structure for over a year, and had hit a wall 11 months earlier when his source went silent. I didn't leak anything. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. I didn't hand over a single confidential document. I called Daniel, off the record, the way you'd call an old friend, and I asked him one question. Are you still working on the ownership story? He was. He told me he'd been stuck for almost a year, missing one final piece that would let him publish without leaving himself exposed. I didn't give him anything I wasn't already permitted to discuss as a named party in the club's own original review. I told him where the public regulatory filings could be cross-referenced, filings that, combined with what he already had quietly gathered over the past year, completed the picture he'd been chasing. 3 weeks later, the league's governing body reopened the investigation. Union East Athletic was formally charged with violating third-party ownership rules. The story broke everywhere: back pages, front pages, sports radio, every podcast in the country with an opinion on football governance. Bramwell, the man hired specifically to modernize the club's image, was suspended within the month. His entire rebrand, the one built around erasing 11 years of history in favor of a clean new face, collapsed under the weight of a scandal he never saw coming, because he'd been too busy clearing out the one person in the building who actually understood where every single body was buried. I signed with a rival club 2 divisions up. At the press conference for my announcement, a young reporter asked me, gently, almost apologetically, whether I had any parting words for Union East Athletic. I remember exactly what I said, because I'd been rehearsing it in my head for weeks without admitting that to myself. I gave them 11 years, I said. They gave me a text message from a friend instead of a phone call from a colleague. I hope Tolia gets the respect I didn't. I never confirmed any role in the governing body's renewed investigation. I never had to. Daniel's reporting stood entirely on its own, properly sourced, fully independent, built on public filings and a year of his own legwork. And when I walked into my new club stadium for my debut, the standing ovation I got didn't come from anyone needing to know the whole story. It came from supporters who understood, in the way football supporters always seem to understand these things, exactly which side of it I'd been on. Bramwell was never publicly tied to the original scandal. He hadn't even been at the club when it happened. But he paid for it anyway, the way people often do when they inherit somebody else's mess and decide arrogance is a reasonable substitute for caution. Union East Athletic spent the following season in turmoil, stripped of league points, their academy recruitment frozen pending review, while I scored 17 goals for a club that called me before they ever needed to call anyone else about me. I think about it sometimes, what would have happened if Daniel had never sent that text? If I'd found out the regular way, in some meeting, with enough warning to make peace with it quietly. Maybe I'd have left with a handshake and a polite quote about new chapters. But they didn't give me that. They gave me 4 words on a Thursday morning, and they never once stopped to ask what a woman who'd spent 11 years learning every corner of that club might still be holding on to. Some clubs forget that loyalty, once spent carelessly, doesn't come back. I'm the kind of person who remembers everything. And I always will.